For patients in my surgery, it has been incredibly emancipating because so many of them come and say, there's nothing I can do for my little girl or my husband or whatever. And this not only provides something that effectively works in many cases, but it provides them with a completely different view of life. That it's about things that they can do actively for each other, but also very much in line with the johrei thinking. It's about giving and receiving. And so you create a very, very different paradigm of healing, which is not about the patient being the victim and being the done to. It's about them being able to do something and also being able to share the experience with others. I think it's a wonderful philosophy, quite apart from whether johrei healing works, and this scientific research that we've both suggested, I think is really interesting, fascinating. The actual philosophy is so good. It's such a marvellous way of interacting and behaving between people.
And then I was also just impressed when I went to Japan for the first time that here was a movement, a tradition that I agreed with completely in terms of its main principles were appreciation of art and beauty, nature forming, and this kind of interactive healing. I mean, what's to argue about that? Very nice, and certainly things that I try to apply in my own life. So that's one reason why I was very attracted to johrei when I first met up with it. Another point of johrei philosophy that I found very appealing and useful is that sickness is purification. That is, being able to give people a different way of thinking about illness. So rather than something awful that's happening to you, that it's going to lead you to a better place of balance. I think it's very useful to be able to give people other ways of conceptualizing illness.
And a very modern in concept, because we now know that if you have a cancer, you're actually producing cells against that cancer all the time. Now, in many cases, you don't win the battle, but it is, if you like, holding things off. And we know survival can be vastly prolonged by your attitude to your cancer, even if you're not going to win at the end. And therefore, this whole issue of belief and unconditional love and the things that people can give each other, enters the scientific field, doesn't it? As I say, I think it's such a wonderfully warm philosophy, and I think creating the fellowships as you are around the world is recreating society. In England, we have this awful expression everyone keeps saying that society is sick, that society is finished. We had a government that said a few years ago there was no such thing as society. We now have a government that says that it wants to create the big society. But governments can't create things like that. It has to be done by people, and people relating in exactly the way I think johrei is showing us how to do.
I think Mokichi Okada's philosophy has a great deal to offer us today in terms of living in harmony with the environment, and especially in how we raise food and appreciating beauty and discovering a healing power that we have within us and are able to share with other people.
Mokichi Okada, the founder of johrei practice, had a remarkable criticism on modernized medical science and the medical practice. He listed 5 shortcomings in the field of Western modern practice. First, modern Western medicine does not recognize or acknowledge the presence of spirit or the spiritual dimension in humans. And second, modern Western medicine does not acknowledge the ability to heal oneself, that is, to allow the state of homeostasis to occur. It also does not recognize that a human being consists of a soul and mind and body. Western medicine, in fact, regards the symptoms as simply allopathic. It also does not look for the cause of illness or the pathology. And 5 is that Western medicine has too much dependence on chemical treatment or chemical medicine. Mokichi Okada's defining and critique of Western medicine seems to have much in common with what you are sharing today.
I think that's completely consistent with the philosophy of integrative medicine. It's the same, exactly the same. And in regard to that last point, I often ask when I teach physicians or medical students, or to general audience as well, I often ask the question, how did we get into the mindset that the only legitimate way to treat illness is by giving drugs? And that's a very interesting question to ask. Where did that come from? The word, medicine has become synonymous with drugs. We talk about giving medicine, taking medicine. That's not what the word originally meant. The word medicine comes from an ancient Indo-Iranian root that means something like thoughtful action to establish order. And it also gives us meditate and measure. How did thoughtful action come to equate with giving and taking drugs? I mean, obviously by giving and taking a lot of drugs over history.
I quite agree, and I think he's ahead of his time, wasn't he? Really, Mikichi Okada.
Absolutely.
And just as you described medicine, if you look at the Greek for doctor, the original meaning was teacher. It wasn't giver of pills. It was someone who teaches and explains. And I think I love the bit about patients being able to heal themselves. We are self-organizing beings, but on so many levels. We know on one level a placebo will work because we think a tablet's going to work, but another level we can change our lives by changing our diet, changing our mindset with mind-body techniques or whatever. And that really should be what we're doing in our surgeries or our rooms when we're seeing patients. We shouldn't simply be saying it's either a drug or a referral to specialists. We should be actually beginning to treat people again, and more than treating them, we should be helping them to be able to treat themselves. I think you're right, it does require a little bit more time than the average consultation. I mean, I only have 10 minutes of time, but I do have the advantage of seeing patients for an average of 11 or 12 years before they move elsewhere. I think if we could encapsulate what Mikichi Okada says and put it in the brains of every doctor, nurse and therapist in the country, considerably improve the care patients get and reduce the amount that we spend on health.
Well, I think what you're interested in doing is spreading Mikichi Okada's philosophy, which is a very powerful philosophy. Actually, I had not read his criticisms of Western medicine before. I think I'm amazed at how they're very spot on. So I think to acquaint other people with his teachings is very important, very worth doing, and that doesn't have to be in a religious context.
No. And I think, provided you keep it, look at Brazil, for instance. You've got an enormous membership in Brazil, and I think that's because johrei has totally adapted to the culture of Brazil, which is a very different temperament from Japan or England or even America. Very passionate, very Latin temperament, and johrei has become a very passionate Latin concept in Brazil. Quite different from Japan. I can almost, so, and yet I think most people, johrei people in Japan, would appreciate that johrei in Brazil has been a great success. So I think build upon that success and let it create in different countries according to those cultures. I think the most difficult thing for you in johrei sometimes is because you need a seed, and that seed is often the Japanese interpreters going to a country, and the important thing is to get your local, I think in commercial terms, is it called product leaders or something like that, who your credible people joining johrei and therefore spreading the word amongst, if you like, their own culture. But making people as a beginning of joining something, believe in something, I think is outdated. Sometimes.